My best friend's dad had an affair with the groom's mom, destroyed 2 families, and turned my dream wedding into a nightmare. When I, Megan, 28F, say her dad, Tom, 58M, caused her fiancé's parents' deaths, I don't mean it literally. There's a lot of background to this story, and I'll explain it as thoroughly as I can without dragging it out too much. Lauren, 27F, and Mark, 28M, met 5 years ago. After dating for 2 years, Mark proposed, and they moved in together. Their engagement party was the first time their families met, and everything seemed to go well. Everyone appeared to get along. But as it turned out, some got along a bit too well. This all came to light a year later. Tom and Mark's mom, Susan, 55F, were having an affair. Not to excuse anyone, as it takes 2 to tango, but all the evidence pointed to Tom initiating it. He was the one who made the first inappropriate contact, sent the first suggestive message, booked the first hotel room, and so on. Lauren's mom straight up divorced Tom and moved away. Lauren, being a daddy's girl, oddly sided with her dad in the divorce, which caused a rift between her and her mom, who has stayed completely out of it for the last 2 years and is only coming to the wedding as a regular guest. A few days after the affair was exposed, Mark's dad, John, died of a massive heart attack. From what I've heard, John was Mark's hero, always there for his family. Mark was spending a lot of time with his dad in those days and was absolutely devastated by the loss. He immediately blamed Tom and Susan for his father's death and cut off all contact with his mom. Despite Susan's attempts to reach out and make amends, Mark's younger sister Emily advised her to give him time, but she wouldn't listen. From what I gather, Susan had a mental breakdown after John's death, turning to self-medication and heavy drinking. 2 months after John's death, Susan, in a desperate attempt to talk to Mark, confronted him at work. It got really ugly, with Mark telling her she was dead to him and that she'd never see a grandchild from him or be part of his life again. Susan went home, called Emily to vent, and got chewed out again for not listening and showing up at Mark's job. Emily then told her she was done trying to help and didn't want to see her either. That night, Susan went on an especially heavy drinking binge and died from an accidental overdose. In 2 months, Mark lost both his parents because of Tom. This almost ended Lauren and Mark's relationship. They decided to try counseling, and in the following 10 months, got back on track and began planning the wedding. Mark's one condition was that Tom was out of their lives forever, and Lauren agreed to this in counseling. This past year as Lauren's best friend and maid of honor has been really challenging. Unfortunately, Lauren has been a bit of a bridezilla. Not completely awful, but annoying and unsympathetic enough to make me question our friendship. I've been trying my best to help with the preparations, despite dealing with my own issues. About 5 months before the wedding, my husband decided to divorce me after 2.5 years of marriage. I won't get into that now, but I just want you to understand my mental state when things started to get crazy. Now, about the bridezilla part. Lauren is one of those brides who has had a vision of her wedding since she was 13 and is determined to make it happen no matter what. So this is a small destination wedding in Jamaica. It was supposed to be just the bride, groom, 4 bridesmaids, 4 groomsmen, originally 4 parents but now down to 1, and about 12 other guests including spouses and a few close friends. I tried to convince her it would be better to have the wedding here in the States, especially given everything that had happened, but she didn't listen. I've been tied up organizing makeup, hair, dresses, and tuxes for Jamaica, while simultaneously going through a divorce. Lauren has shown very little sympathy, always saying, "I know, I'm so sorry for you. I'll absolutely be there for you after the wedding. I just need to get through this first," and so on. Anyway, I'm pushing through. Here's where the biggest problem arises. About a month before the wedding, Lauren decides she wants her dad to walk her down the aisle. I knew she was planning this all along, even if she didn't say it. She brings this up to Mark, saying it's her dream wedding, and she always envisioned her dad giving her away. Then they can go no contact. It's just for this one day. Mark understandably freaks out and says no way. They argue for an hour until Mark finally says, "Fine, he can walk you, but it will be at your next wedding because this one is off." Mark leaves and doesn't come back. Lauren has a meltdown and starts calling me. She decided that the day my divorce was finalized was the day to bring this up, so I wasn't exactly available. After about 6 hours, she shows up at my new 1-bedroom apartment. Yay me, a total mess. I tell her she needs to start trying to call him. Mark ignores her for 2 days before we track him down. They talk, She swears Tom is cut off, and that it was just her being crazy before the wedding. He gives her another chance and the wedding plans continue. I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of hoping the wedding would be off. But a few weeks later, we all boarded a plane for Jamaica, and possibly the biggest fiasco in wedding history. We arrived, and it was a tight schedule at the beginning. Luckily, we had an early morning arrival, giving us the entire day on day 2 for prep, with the wedding on day 3. The bride and groom were set to leave on a 4-day cruise on day 4, then return to the resort for a week after. The rest of the guests were staying at the resort from days 4 to 7. We were supposed to greet them upon their return from the cruise before catching our flights out later that day. It was really too much, but I was looking forward to basically 3.5 days of vacation. I really felt like I deserved it after dealing with the drama of this wedding for so long, plus going through my own divorce. The first red flag that things were going to get ugly appeared when the tuxedos were delivered. There were 6 of them. I knew the groom and 4 groomsmen made 5, so why were there 6? Lauren said it must have been a mistake on the store's end, laughing, "Who cares, at least it wasn't 4. I had my suspicions, and I'm sure you all are thinking the same thing. Day 2 and the morning of the wedding were a blur. We were busy getting ready, decorating, doing hair and makeup, and getting into our dresses. Despite all this, I noticed Lauren was on her phone more than usual, especially considering everyone important was already there with her. When the actual ceremony began, and nothing crazy had happened, I was very relieved. Everyone walked out, and it was all very nice. Mark stood at the altar, wedding party on each side, everything looking perfect. The music started, and Lauren stepped out with Tom on her arm. The air left the space, and this was an outdoor wedding. I glanced at Mark, tears forming in his eyes and rage brewing on his face. A couple of the groomsmen looked visibly angry. I was beside myself. I've known Lauren for 9 years and never thought she could be this dense and selfish. I'm sure she thought Mark, being the good guy he is, would never make a scene and would just play along, smoothing things over later. She was wrong. All the guests stared in pure bewilderment, their faces frozen in shock. When they reached the altar, Tom, in a move of pure stupidity, extended his hand towards Mark. I get that it's a custom, but goddamn, read the room, man. As he stood there with his hand extended, Mark landed an overhand right punch square on his nose. Blood spattered, leaving a red mist on Lauren's white dress. Tom hit the ground, but being a tough old bastard, he popped up ready to fight Mark. As he charged, Mark's best man, Jim, came out of nowhere and kicked Tom square in the chest, sending him flying to the ground again. He wallowed around, winded. One of the other bridesmaids' husbands jumped in to break things up. Meanwhile, Lauren was in Mark's face, screaming. I got between them and called the other bridesmaids to help get her out of there. They got in between us, and I turned to start pushing Mark out of the area. Tom was still flopping on the ground when his ex-wife walked over, stomped on his balls, and then exited the scene. As I was pushing Mark one way, Lauren slipped past the others and started screaming at me, "You cunt! Don't think taking and fucking my husband is gonna make up for not fucking your own." That was a low blow. This bitch had officially lost her mind. I turned to her and said, "What did you say?" She doubled down. "You heard me. You ruined your marriage by being a boring fuck. Don't think you can make up for that by taking mine now." I snapped, and it was on. It was a mess of slapping, hair pulling, and dress ripping. The other ladies jumped in and broke things up, both of us screaming at each other. Once everyone was separated, it calmed down. Different groups were pushed back to their rooms. I was reeling. Lauren had really cut deep. The idea that I was after her husband was ridiculous. I had never even had a private conversation with Mark. That was just her being crazy. But to use my own divorce against me, to cut me the way my ex-husband had, that was too low. We were done. Our friendship was dead. Lauren, much to everyone's delight, changed her flight and left that very night, taking Tom with her. We all assumed we were getting kicked out of the resort for the fight, but the hotel manager said drunk Americans fighting at a wedding was pretty normal. He warned us that if it happened again, they'd call the authorities. One bridesmaid and her husband managed to get Lauren and Mark's cruise trip switched to them for a low fee. Everyone slept off the rest of the wedding day. Lauren's mom and a couple of older guests left on day 4. Mark stayed at the resort for the rest of the week, as did the rest of the wedding party and a few other friends. We decided to live it up for 3 days. We started that night on day 4. I, for one, was cutting loose. I had the year from hell, with a divorce and a bridezilla, all culminating in the most disastrous wedding ever. Well, It got weird on night 1. After some heavy drinking, I found myself waking up naked in bed with Mark. We both looked at each other in the morning like, what the hell did we do, and what do we do now? It may not have been the best decision, but we decided that going for round 2 right then was the thing to do. It was the first of many more rounds over the next few days. I hadn't been this uninhibited in so long. I made the most of every moment. When it was time for me to fly out, Mark still had another week at the resort for his honeymoon. We didn't do any romantic movie-esque goodbye or anything. I left on the same flight with a few other guests. Others had left at various times that day and the days prior. On my ride home, I was feeling very guilty. It wasn't guilt for what happened with Mark v. DJ screw Lauren v. GJ, but for my ex-husband. I came to realize on that flight that I had this idea of what I wanted married life to be, or maybe just what it was supposed to be. I knew we both made mistakes, but for once, I was starting to realize that mine were the ones that really led to our divorce. I had a fling with Mark, but what I really wanted was my ex-husband back. I was going to try when I returned. Unfortunately, I would find out that some mistakes have a way of catching up with you, while others somehow come full circle. I waited a full week before calling my ex-husband. I wanted to have all my thoughts in order. I ran through things he might say, I ran through things I wanted to say, and I had fake conversations with myself. When I finally sent him a text asking to talk, I was so nervous I hoped he wouldn't respond. But just like that, he texted back, "Why?" Of all the scenarios I ran through, this wasn't one of them. I texted back and said, "I miss you, and wondered if we could just talk. No pressure, just talk." He responded, "I don't know, I'm not sure I want that. I know it probably took a lot to reach out, so I will say this. I'm not sure if I'm ready to talk. I would prefer if you gave me some time to think about it. Please don't message again. I will reach out once I have an answer, and I promise not to keep you waiting longer than a week." This was the longest week of my life. When I got a message from him exactly 1 week later, I felt nauseous with nerves. He wanted to know why I missed him and why I wanted to talk. I told him I had a revelation about our problems, that I didn't treat him fairly, and that I was finally starting to see how I made him feel. I wanted to try again, that no matter what, I chose him. I wanted to be with him for life, have kids, grow old together, all the things. He responded, "I'm not sure I want to try again, but I'm willing to continue talking. We can see what happens from there. I'm going to go now. Feel free to call me tomorrow after work." For the next 3 days, we talked after work. The first couple of days, we just caught each other up on our lives. It was awkward, like when you run into an old high school friend at the mall, but it was a start. It was on the 3rd day that things got real. We began to talk about our marriage problems. I knew he was hurt and that I minimized his feelings. When he asked for a divorce, I got defensive and aggressive instead of listening. I was trying to just listen now when I had an intrusive thought. This thought made me ask, "Have you started dating or seeing anyone? It's okay if you have. We said we would just talk, so I don't expect anything. I'm just wondering." He told me he had not, though he did create a dating profile, but hadn't put much effort into it and hadn't had a match. I felt relieved by this, but I should have realized what he was about to ask. He said, "Well, how about you?" I wanted so badly to lie, to not tell him about Mark, but I knew I couldn't hide it. So I told him all about the wedding, which I had said I wasn't ready to talk about up to this point, and what happened after. He asked a few more probing questions, and I knew I had set us back. He got off the call pretty quickly after. I wondered if he would call me back. I tried calling and texting the next couple of days but got no response. That's when I came to a realization. It had been at least 40 days since my last period, and panic set in immediately. I rushed out to the pharmacy and grabbed a 3-pack off the shelf. When the first one came back positive, I took the second, then the third VDJ all positive. That same day, my ex-husband called me for the last time. I didn't waste any time and told him right away. We essentially said our goodbyes. He was certain there was no future for us now. I cried for a week straight. At that point, I contacted Mark and told him. Over the next month, we talked it out and came up with a plan for our future as parents. We had no plans of starting a relationship, just promised to be the best co-parents we could be. He was really supportive throughout the whole pregnancy and was in the delivery room when our daughter was born. 4 months after her birth, Mark stopped by to check on us. This was very common, and I felt good each time he did. He looked at me with this warm smile and said, "Do you want to go out with me on a real date?" I was shocked at the time, but he just continued. "I think we had so much trauma from our last relationships that neither of us was ready for another. But maybe it's time, and maybe we should give each other a chance." That was 5 years ago. We've been married for 3 now. I can't believe where we are. Our relationship dynamic has evolved, but we are closer and happier than ever. Lauren came back with some ugly social media posts and passive-aggressive stuff for the first 6 months post-wedding. I learned this from friends as I had blocked her upon my return. We didn't do any large pregnancy announcements, obviously, as the circumstances were a little embarrassing. We sent out exactly one card, a picture of Mark standing behind me with his hands on my belly. The card just said, "Lauren, we're all doing so much better without you." We never heard from her again. After that last phone call, I never heard from my ex-husband again. I love Mark, but every once in a while, my ex will creep into my head, and I'll have a moment where I wish we had at least gotten closure. I heard he had met someone, but that was all I knew. That is until this past Saturday night. Mark and I left our girl with my parents and took ourselves on a little vacation. We got dressed up on Saturday night and went out to a club for the first time. We weren't there 15 minutes when we ran into my ex and his new wife. I didn't know what to say. He was so different, but in a good way. We took a moment to talk, and by the end of the night, I felt like we both finally had closure. I would give you all more details, but honestly, I feel like that's his story to tell.